This is the first of 3 workshops that are being set up online as part of the Boston Community Archaeology project at Rosegarth Square. We're going to be introducing you to different aspects of archaeological research in the run-up to actually putting some holes in the ground on the site that's to be developed. At the end of each of the presentations, we'll be signposting you to some ways in which you can get involved with the project. So please keep an eye out on our social media channels and the council website. In 2023, Boston Borough Council successfully secured £14.8 million from the government in order to fund regeneration and secure further investment in the heart of Boston Town Centre. As part of this, a new public park spanning the area between the river and the Len Medlock Centre is going to be constructed. This is going to include some new green spaces, improved pedestrian access, artwork and other features to make it a much more inviting, safe and accessible environment. Alongside this, Crown House is going to be converted to provide a mix of residential and other uses, specifically to support young people and families. The B&M building is going to be demolished as part of enabling works to future redevelopment of the area. In conjunction with the proposed work, a programme of community engagement is going to be undertaken, including this linked archaeology programme. The idea of this programme is to better understand the history of the site and to help to link the area's past to its future. One of the first steps in the process was carrying out a desk-based assessment to support the planning application for the redevelopment of the area. The results of the desk-based assessment open up new avenues for further investigation and help us understand what the area looked like in the past. So what is desk-based assessment? Well, it's a programme of study of the historic environment within the specified area, in this case, the development area around Rosegarth Square. The purpose of it is to address some agreed research or conservation objectives. And it's carried out by analysis of written, graphic and photographic and online information to identify what the local likely heritage assets, that's the technical term for structures, buildings, designed landscapes, wrecks and archaeological sites, and their significance. As part of the desk-based assessment, it also considers the setting of heritage assets, and in England, the nature, extent and quality of the potential archaeological, historic and architectural interest. All of this information is then compiled to create an understanding of the significance of those heritage assets as it is judged in a local, regional, national and international context. One of the first steps in compiling the desk-based assessment is to look at what's called the Historic Environment Record. This is basically a database that's maintained by each of the local planning authorities or local councils and that shows the location of things like listed buildings, archaeological finds and excavations and historic events. This slide shows a plan that was produced by the company that compiled the desk-based assessment, RSK ADAS, who created a plan of the HER data related to the site. Each of the numbers on this plan is one HER entry. And you can see that within the red line boundary that is the edge of the development, there are a number of named assets, named historic buildings that we're going to come back to and discuss in a bit. One of the other key pieces of evidence that we look at is historic mapping. That includes ordnance survey maps, which usually date all the way back until the early 19th century, the 1820s to 1830s. And before that, we can look at things like tithe maps that were put together to look at what areas were being taxed, and other things like estate maps and plans, which may be in the local archives or in archives associated with particular buildings. An example of this is shown in the next slide. And here you can see the Ordnance Survey map of 1938, which shows the layout of the streets within the site, with Lincoln Lane to the north, Rosegarth Street cutting through the centre of the site, and off to the east, Pinfold Lane and Stanbow Hill. As you can see, at this point in time, the site is full of buildings in the areas that are now mostly car parking and open spaces. So when all this information is compiled in the desk-based assessment, what does it tell us about the site? Well, here we can see the plan from the desk-based assessment again, with the area that we're planning to investigate with an archaeological dig outlined in as a blue square on the right-hand side of the slide. We've just picked out some of the key assets or key places of interest within the site to talk about a little bit more. Boston is considered to have an ancient town plan. A number of the bridges are Georgian, so they date from the 18th century, and it has major ecclesiastical site and lots of medieval to 17th century buildings that are notable. To the east of the site is a conservation area which has been deemed to be of special interest because of the quality of its buildings and the historic interest of those streets. The Church of St Botolph is located about 65 metres to the northeast of the site and dates to the early 14th century. The church is particularly known for its tower, which is the tallest tower on any parish church in England. During the 1960s, the Lincoln Lane area, if you remember from the previous Ordnance Survey map, Lincoln Lane ran across the north of the site, was demolished in preparation for redevelopment. From 1932 to about 1961, upwards of around about 100 properties had already been pulled down, either by the corporation or by their owners. But when it was built, the area was a prosperous place with many houses, including several large merchant houses and their gardens. It was mostly residential, but as you can see from the names on this picture here, there were quite a number of public houses, particularly in the 19th century. There were also shops and industrial premises, including a slaughterhouse and, as you can see here, the Boston Steam Laundry, which was originally a cigar factory. The redevelopment of the site in the 20th century is probably going to have removed or truncated most of the remains associated with these buildings. But it is possible that some evidence still remains below the ground, particularly of things like foundations and cellars. Within the site as a whole, there are the buried remains associated with a pound, which you can see as number 33. This pound or pinfold is just off what was later Pinfold Lane and would have been a pound in which animals were stored on their way to market or which lost animals were rounded up for collection. We know that the pound was relocated elsewhere in 1658, so this is quite an early feature. As you can see, there are several public houses within this space. The Nag's Head was an 18th century inn. The Victoria Inn, which is number 98 on our plan, was built in the 19th century. The Victoria Inn, which is number 98 on our plan, was built in the 19th century and was demolished as part of the Lincoln Lane redevelopment. The Hop Pole was also built in the 19th century and similarly demolished in the 1960s. To the east of our site, the Blue Lion, which was number 97 on the previous slide, was demolished in the 1960s as well, and it was also a 19th century public house, and it was located very close to where we're planning to dig, as you can see on this Ordnance Survey map of 1889. This map also clearly shows the site of the maltings. We've got a timber yard in the west, and you can see much more clearly on this plan the terraced houses and the rows of terraced houses along Lincoln Lane and the streets off it. One other strand of evidence that we can look at are historic photographs, and there are a number of places online where you can look at these. Historic England maintain a database of historic photographs that you can search by place, and some of the images here have come from that. This image shows a view down the river towards the Boston Stump and gives you an idea of just how closely packed all the buildings along the riverside once were. This photograph shows a view of the houses down Lincoln Lane, and you can see that they're mostly two-storey houses built of brick, fairly modest in their construction. Some of them are a little larger, and there are some properties that look like they've probably got commercial premises on the ground floor. But these buildings, there may be still traces of them below ground, especially, as I mentioned, if they had cellars or if there are deeper foundations. And this shows a similar view along Rosegarth Street. Here we have some slightly larger buildings, but you can also see that the houses are of different dates. You can tell this from the different kinds of windows and the changes in roof lines. And this and the previous image come from a blog that was put together by a man called Billy Thorne in 2011, and we'll put a link to that at the end of this presentation. Aerial photographs can also give us information about the site as it used to look. And again, Historic England have records of aerial photographs that cover the entire country. In particular, this includes images that were taken by the RAF during the Second World War. This is a photograph that was taken slightly later in the 20th century, and it shows that some of the site has already been cleared at this point. But it gives you an idea of the way that the street layout was still retained at that point in time. And this image shows the Blue Lion on the bottom left corner and the Victoria Inn on the far right. One of the strands of evidence that isn't in a desk-based assessment is what tends to be called oral history, which is basically a record of our memories that form part of the historic record. In this particular case, we have some information on Rosegarth Square from the 1960s, when the Lincoln Lane development was going ahead. And again, credit to the previously mentioned blog for some of this information, which has come from newspaper archives. So what did the residents in 1961 say when they were told that they were going to have to leave for a programme of improvements? Well, at the Victoria Inn, Mrs. Agnes Berry, wife of the landlord, said, "I'm not really bothered, but I know most of my customers are." Whereas at 13 Rosegarth Street, Tom and William Cushley, who were brothers, aged 66 and 70 respectively, and were both retired corporation dustmen, said, "We've both had 35 years on the ash carts. We were happily living here together. It suits us and we're never badly. Of course we don't want to move. I spent 4 years out in France without a scratch." He was referring to his First World War experiences. "And now after 5 years here, they want me out. And it'll be a fourth time." At 16 Rosegarth Street, the family took a different view and said, "We've always lived in old houses and it'll be a pleasure to get away from this and into a decent one. We've no bath, no electricity, and the place is damp." Meanwhile, at the grocer's shop in Lincoln Lane, Mrs. May Peacock said, "I've been in this shop for 24 years and the ground opposite has been waste all of that time, and we want to know definitely what's going to happen and when. This shop is my living." As part of our project, it would be really interesting if we could follow up on some of this, maybe find out how these people felt after they'd had to move. Perhaps you know someone who's related to the people mentioned in that article, or perhaps you have family memories of the redevelopment itself. We'll explain how you can contribute those to the project at the end of this presentation. So, as mentioned at the start, this is the first of 3 presentations to introduce you to different aspects of archaeological work, to introduce you to the project, and to tell you how you can get involved yourself. In terms of general archive research, there are lots of places that you can go for information, both online and to look at physical records. We've just put a few of them on this slide to talk about the photographs that we mentioned, Kelly's Directories of Lincolnshire, which are trade directories that you can search online and which provide information about things like who was the licensed holder of a pub, what businesses were trading from what different premises. I've put a link to the blog that I mentioned previously, and I've also put the details of the British Newspaper Archive on here. As mentioned previously, it's a great place to find out what people thought, or at least what people were prepared to tell the papers that they thought of the development as it was going on. We'd really like to find out more from the public about their experiences and memories of the site. Perhaps your family lived in one of the houses that was demolished in the 1960s. Perhaps you have memories of going to one of those pubs. We'll be collating the information that people provide to us to create an online resource, and at the end of the project, a small exhibition is going to be held at the Guildhall in Boston in December 2024. In order to submit the information to the project team, we've created a form that you can fill out through a link and an email address for the project that allows you to send information and photographs across. Keep an eye on our social media channels for more information about these, and we're looking forward to finding out your information. The community excavation on the site is planned for the end of October to coincide with the October school holidays, and we hope to see some of you signing up to volunteer to come along.